9th, 1953, the Alphonsiel Post hosted a banquet honoring Manville's Gold Star mothers, all of whom lost sons during the World War.
My husband Albert was in the Inspector General Corps during World War II. He inspected the Nazi atrocities of the gas chambers in Germany. He served in Korea and under General Van Fleet as his private secretary. After Korea, he was secretary to General Wyman until he retired.
After the Vietnam War, a group of veterans got together. They started wearing a green cap and became known as the Green Cappers.
We were invited by Caspar Weinberger, which was President Reagan's Secretary of Defense back then, to attend the funeral of the unknown Vietnam soldier, which we did on Memorial Day 1984. And from there we ended up meeting with President Ronald Reagan in the Oval Office on September 23rd, 1985. The reason we met with him is because through correspondence, he wanted to meet our group because we held so many medals together as just being 15 guys, we had tons of decorations. And we met with the president for approximately 25 minutes, and it was really exciting to meet with the President of the United States. I'm the one that presented him with one of our caps that says Vietnam on it. I thanked the president for, at that time when I presented the cap to him, I said, Mr. President, we present this cap to you because of your strong leadership that you have shown in the United States and making us proud of our country again.
Just close your eyes and open your hearts and feel your worries and cares depart. Just yield yourself to the Father above and let Him hold you secure in His love. For life on earth grows more involved with endless problems that can't be solved. But God only asks us to do our best, and He will take over and finish the rest. So when you are tired, discouraged, and blue, there's always one door that is open to you, and that is the door to the house of prayer. And you'll find God waiting to meet you there. And the house of prayer is no further away than the quiet spot where you kneel and pray. For the heart is a temple when God is there, as we leave ourselves in His following care. Amen.
Ah, que nos pères étaient heureux quand ils étaient à table.
Quand ils étaient à table,
le vin coulait à côté d'eux. Ça leur était fort agréable.
Ça leur était fort agréable.
Ils buvaient à plein tonneau, comme des tours, morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Ils n'avaient ni riche buffet, ni verre de Venise.
Ni verre de Venise.
Mais ils avaient des gobelets aussi grands que la barbe grise.
Aussi grands que la barbe grise.
Ils buvaient à plein tonneau,
comme des tours,
morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Il ne savait ni le latin, ni la théologie.
Ni la théologie.
In the late 1800s, Henry Dupree started a barber shop. His son George Dupree remembers working for his father when he was 12 years old, getting 10 cents for a shave and 15 to 20 cents for a haircut. These were the days when everyone had a shaving mug with his name on it. He remembers working 6 days a week from 7 in the morning until 10 at night. In 1895, the Central Hotel advertised that it was now ready to furnish first-class accommodations. It had fine parlors and dining rooms, sample rooms, and billiard parlors. Meals were served at all hours with special rates to commercial travelers. It had hot and cold water baths and a good stable. At the turn of the century, the Manville Mill was a booming industry, and many businesses opened to meet the needs of the people.
The Manville Jenks had their own store. It was called the Manville Emporium. It was on Summer Street. A lot of times the mill would pay you off in tokens. And you could use those tokens at the store to buy their products. Now, they had everything in there, including a barbershop downstairs there. It later became a grocery store. It became the AMP, and after the AMP it became the IGA. It was run by George Hurto. And then after the stores closed, it became the Club Cafe, and that was the last business they had there. It was later torn down to make a parking lot for Lou's Cafe. On the third floor, there was a beautiful hall over there, and there was a lot of weddings and parties that were held there.
In 1907, a meat and grocery store called the Manville Provision Company opened for business on Summer Street. The store had 13 employees with 4 horse-drawn delivery wagons.
They were the same as Giroux, but they dealt also in meat. And they had beautiful horses. They had a big white horses. They used to pull that heavy meat wagon all the way to Ashton. They used to go and take orders and deliver meat in Ashton in those days.
The Manville Provision Company closed its doors in 1967, ending a 60-year business. There were many other small markets in Manville.
Yeah, there was Kulik, there was Ladgy's Market. What other market? Oh, Poisson on Railroad Street. There was a little market over there. And also Gouzy Market on Old River Road.
My parents dealt with Peter Kulik, who had a store on Spring Street. And so I rarely went to Manville Provision, which was on the next street. In fact, there were 3 markets practically within the same block. You had Kulik's Market, you had Clover Farm, and you had Manville Provision. And I could remember every morning Mr. Kulik would go out and roll down the awning and crank down the awning and then pull it to raise the support bars, and they would deliver. And I could remember he had this big console, and whenever a lot of people bought on credit, and they would pay their bills once a week or whenever, and you had these little slips, these pads, and he would record, and then he had this index file, and all the accounts were maintained on these slips in this index file system.
Giroux and Company General Store was located on Winter Street.
My father used to work for Mr. Giroux. He used to have horses teaming and hauling grain and all kinds of supplies from the depot here. There used to be a shed there, and the trains used to come, stop there and deliver that. And that's what he did. He used to team for, in other words, they used to call it teamers, a teamster like in them days. He used to take care of the horses and haul grain and so forth.
Since the early 1920s, the Nault family has been operating Nault's Tire and Battery Shop on Railroad Street, fixing cars like the Model A and Model T Fords, the LaSalle, the Rio, the Essex, the Pierce Arrow, and the Stanley Steamer. Wilfred Nault started selling Gulf gas in 1924. Back in those days, gas was 19 cents a gallon. The building had always been used as a clubhouse, a place for retired men to gather, talk, and tell stories.
It was a hangout. I worked there for a while. Before I worked, I was hanging around with the older people from Manville that was over there, and they were talking mostly about current affair and the sport a lot.
In 1983, they were forced out of business when Gulf Oil demanded that they double their volume of sales. Chick's Store and Bowling Alley, owned by Chick Gagnon, first opened in the former Bijou building. Standing in front of Chick's is Manville resident Emil Paquin. When Lou Lawrence bought the business, he kept the name Chick's, and everybody called him Chick. His daughters Gloria and Lorraine are working behind the counter.
There was also a bowling alley called Chick's, just a block down from my house. And they did duck pin bowling in those days. And I remember some of these strong guys whipping balls down the alleys and against those duck pins and making them fly all over the place. It was very impressive.
Most of the conversation at Chick's, most of the time was in French. There was maybe about 15 or 20 people that went there every day. Every day we went to Chick to talk about sports and current affair. And there was some pretty hot argument there about sports usually, because there was a lot of Canadian fan and a lot of Bruins fan that comes over there.
And Chick's was also a soda fountain. There were a lot of soda fountains in Manville in those days. Interestingly enough, the most popular drink in all of the soda fountains in Manville was Bromo Seltzer. It's crazy, I don't know why. But it was very common to see somebody walk into a soda fountain and say, "Give me a Bromo."
The Bromo Seltzer they used to sell was unbelievable. People would go in and say, "Hey, Chick, I'll have a Bromo." Or not even, "Chick, my special." And he would take out the bottle of Bromo Seltzer and the spoon and seltzer water, or some people would have a bottle of seltzer water and they'd use that, and then he'd take the Bromo and the spoon and stir it out, put it in, stir it up, and people would gulp that like soda. In fact, the rumor has it that at one time, and I don't know if there's any truth to this, but at one time the records of the wholesalers indicated that there was so much Bromo sold in Manville at about 3 different variety stores or soda fountains, that some federal authority or state authorities came to find out if there was some sort of drug-related interaction with Bromo Seltzer.
This is a wedding picture of Ben Marcel and his bride Lagat, taken at Handy's Pond. He was the owner of Ben's Lunch on Summer Street.
Well, we had slot machine in the variety store. That was the only way that kept us open, because we didn't make enough money selling ice cream and Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola and cigarettes. So to pay the heat, because the guys, there was always 20 and 25 guys in the back room at the store. And they'd stay there all the time. After work, they'd come in after dinner. They'd come in and spend the evening there and talk about what they did all day. Huh? So that didn't bring too much money. One guy would have a Hoodsy, which was 7 cents, and a Pepsi Cola that was 5 cents. So we didn't get rich on that, but we had 2 or 3 slot machines. And I was working there. And I was very tiny. I weighed like 106 pounds, and the state troopers would come in and raid us, take the slot machines, and they'd say, "Hey, where's the owner?" "We don't know." I was working there, but I didn't want to tell them. "Well, when the owner comes in, tell him to come and sign for those machines at the Lincoln Barracks." "Okay." When my brother would come in, I'd say, "Hey, slot machines at Lincoln Barracks, go sign for them." But by the time he'd go and sign for them, he'd call a guy from New Hampshire. The guy had, I think it was 12 or 1,500 machines. The next morning we had 3 more machines in the back room. That was the only way we could survive, you know.
During Prohibition, it was unlawful to sell alcohol. but some of the businesses continued to sell their liquor secretly.
The speakeasy, well, from what it is, it's while doing prohibition. You weren't allowed to sell alcohol or any beer or such things, and they opened all little places. You know, some of them were in the cellar, and they'd sell it anyway. And they call them speakeasy because you had to go over there and talk out so the people on the outside can't hear what's going on. And that's why they call them speakeasy. There was quite a few, and every once in a while, I guess they spoke too loud because the state troop would come around, and right across from Lou's Cafe, just a little bit up there, well, it would be across the street from the Hall Jacques Cartier that I said the state troop would go in. At the Grennan was the guy that used to run that speakeasy. They'd come out, the state trooper would come out with case after case of beer and break him against the wall on the far end.
This is my father, Alfred Gladue. He owned Clover Farm Stores, also known as Gladue's Market. It was located on Park Street. My father started the store by working for Mr. Grennan. And he worked there for a long time with the old man Grennan. And then when he was ready to retire, my father bought the whole business and the building from him. This is my father's store, as it looked like around 1928. The room in the back was the meat cutting department. It was torn down in the mid-40s, and the refrigeration unit was moved to the back of the store, with the meat cutting department being open and made it possible for the customers to watch the meat cutter prepare their meat as they ordered it. Some customers even cut their own meat. You couldn't do that now. The man on my left is Norman Viola. On my right is Ansim Gorchi, an employee and a longtime family friend. He lived at 150 Salesville Road, an old farmhouse which was torn down to make Route 99. Next to him is my father, Alfred Gladue. He was the meat cutter. He was also a fireman for 43 years, retiring as fire chief. When the whistle blew, he always went to the fire. He never missed an alarm. If he was alone at the store, he'd lock the store up. The young boy to his right is Morris Valket, who worked at the store for many years. He had a brother who drowned in the Blackstone River. He told me it happened right under the bridge. The loss of his brother affected him most of his life. Next to him is Joe Charbonneau. Everybody knew him as Old Man Charbonneau. Seems like he never changed. He always looked the same. Customer in front is Albert Blaze. He was a barber. His shop was in the same building as the store at the corner of Park and Summer. It later became Gene Robin's barber shop. Well, it's time to leave the old place. Who says time travel is impossible?
Mandeville Garage opened after World War I when Ephraim Mandeville returned from the war.
So he wanted to go into mechanics, wanted to go into the automobile business. And again, his father helped him, because his father sent him to school. I believe it was in Chicago that he went to school. And when he came back, his father set up Manville Chevrolet for him. Manville Garage at the time, it wasn't Manville Chevrolet, it was just Manville Garage. But this garage was built on land that my grandfather owned. It was right next to his home. My grandfather had a two-family home right there next to it, and he built the garage there.
Ephraim met Donia Fortier, and they were married on June 21st, 1921.
My mother and father had met, I think, through music, really. My mother had a beautiful, trained voice. She was a soprano. She played the piano, of course, she knew music. And she sang at functions, and I'm sure, you know, that's how they met.
Ephraim Mandeville opened the business in 1922. He worked on cars, occasionally sold a car, pumped gas, and repaired tires. Back then, he had to deal with wooden wheels with solid rubber tires.
During that time, my mother had been his bookkeeper. My mother did the bookkeeping. My mother had worked at the Manville Mill in the office. And so after they were married, she took over the bookkeeping for him.
When he died in 1929, his wife Donia was left with the garage and 3 small children to support. This was during the Depression. She decided to keep the business going and ran all aspects of it herself.
She had been buying cars from other dealers, as my father used to do. Marco Chevrolet in Woonsocket would provide cars when they had someone interested in buying a car. She continued that. But then in 1930, she went to Chevrolet division and asked for a dealership. And they did grant it to her. And she did, I guess, become the first lady dealer, first Chevrolet dealer. But I mean, I can remember where she was a good sales lady, you know, whenever the occasion presented itself, she would talk to people about changing their car, or she had this nice car, would they like to look at it, or, you know, she was a good salesperson. She'd go out and give gas if, you know, none of the men were around or they were busy doing things in the service area. She'd go out and give gas. People loved to speak to her. She was a very nice lady, a very talkative lady. She loved to talk. She loved to socialize. It's probably why she was so successful also. My mother sold cars, but she never drove. My mother never had a driver's license. This picture shows my brother in front of Manville garage. I can identify one of the mechanics. His name was Eugene Henry.
After World War II, Donia's oldest son, Ferdinand, worked at the business.
And then that's when the expansion came in. They built a new showroom.
Donia died in 1960. Fern took over, and in 1964, the business moved to North Attleboro, Massachusetts. In 1973, he bought land on Route 1 in North Attleboro and moved again. The business is still there today. This building on Winter Street was first used as a stagecoach stop. Later on, different businesses would locate in the same building.
Ah, que nos pères étaient heureux quand ils étaient à table.
Quand ils étaient à table,
le vin coulait à côté d'eux. Ça leur était fort agréable.
Ça leur était fort agréable.
Ils buvaient à plein tonneaux, comme des trous, morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Ils n'avaient ni riche buffet, ni verre de Venise.
Ni verre de Venise.
Mais ils avaient des gobelets aussi grands que la barbe grise.
Aussi grands que la barbe grise.
Ils buvaient à plein tonneaux, comme des trous, morbleu, bien autrement que nous. Morbleu.
The Manville Coffee Shop was once a cafe. Later, it was Sue's Rendezvous.
Ni le latin, ni la théologie.
Ni la théologie.
Mais ils avaient le goût du vin. C'était là leur philosophie.
C'était là leur philosophie.
Ils buvaient à plein tonneaux. Comme des trous, morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Morbleu, bien autrement que nous.
Quand ils avaient quelques chagrins ou quelques maladies, ils plantaient là le médecin, apothicaire et pharmacie. Ils buvaient à plein tonneaux, comme des trous.
Hi, my name is Jerry Dumas, the previous owner of Lil and Jeans, which was the second generation. My mom and dad, Lil and Jeans, was the first generation. And now the third generation is my son Corey. To the left in the dining room, at one point in time it used to be the town jail. Over here on this side where we're sitting now used to be Terrain's Bar. Also after that, it was the G&G Cafe, owned and operated by my father, Eugene.
The history of baseball in Manville, it goes way, way back to the turn of the century. As a matter of fact, all of northern Rhode Island had baseball teams. All the mills had baseball teams. You had plenty of sponsors and all sorts of leagues. There was a team called the Manville Independents that played in those days. The early town teams attracted a lot of publicity, and because baseball was so popular in this area, there were a lot of barnstorming teams from the major leagues that would make their stops. I'm told that Babe Ruth himself came to Manville and played in an exhibition game on Gervais Field, which was not too far from the railroad station. So that must have been very special in those days.
All the mills, I think, in those days had teams, and they used to play every Sunday. Well, and they used to barnstorm, what they used to call barnstorming. They'd come down with 3 or 4 big leaguers, and I don't know what they got paid, maybe not very much in those days, to play for some of the local teams.
My father played baseball for the Club Montcalm, and when I was old enough, I went to the Club Montcalm, but I didn't get involved with baseball over there. But they still had a team, the club still had a team that played all over Rhode Island.
But Manville had its own great players as well. See, in those days they didn't have farm systems like they have today. So the great players came out of these industrial leagues and town teams, and there were scouts everywhere picking these guys up. There was a player by the name of Joe Connolly who lived on Sales Hill Road. He played for the Braves from 1913 to 1917.
His baseball career started locally, and then he went to the minors. He played in the minor league for several years. He's a pitcher, and he had trouble with his arm,